Hello there. Hey guys, it's Stephanie Kirk here, AP Language and Composition. Today, I'm so excited to talk about the rhetorical situation. I'm a total nerd, I get it, but I love the rhetorical situation. How do you guys feel about it? Can you give me a little something down in the chat so I can see? Any kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, no, I'm not even there yet? How do you guys feel about the rhetorical situation? Okay, so we'll go ahead and just kind of get started. And then, of course, as we go, if you have any questions, feel free to kind of put them down there and we'll look at it. Hi, welcome back. We'll look at it and kind of go through tonight's lesson. So we're going to look at the rhetorical situation as a whole, and we're going to focus in a bit on the rhetorical triangle. So if we think about the rhetorical triangle, can anybody tell me what we're talking about? What in the world is the rhetorical triangle? What does this crazy lady mean? Can you tell me in the chat? Okay, well, Ethos, Logos, and Pathos, absolutely. So that is our starting point. But my guess is that you probably experienced that when you were in your English 2 class. So as you jump that bridge and you kind of come into AP Language and Composition, we're going to kick it up a bit and we're going to go to the next level. So first of all, I just want to remind you that we are Think Fiveable. If you are not following us, you are missing out. So please make an effort to follow us. We are out there on several different resources. And then, of course, I'm on there as well at Kirk's Corner, so you can follow me. So I want to start with what we've got coming up for you. Some super exciting things. First of all, tomorrow, the new rubrics with Brandon. I think that's going to be a great piece of information to have. It is very different from last year's rubric, so please check in with Brandon. And then on Saturday, finding rhetorical strategies. And this one's going to be great because there's so much that you don't know how to look at it, but then sometimes you're like, I can't find anything. What am I going to do? And so Catherine's really going to help you out there. Next week, we're going to look at essay reviews and then, of course, sophistication. And sophistication, I think, is going to be a big one because on all of the rubrics, it's like a 0 or a 1. So either you have it or you don't. And Kevin's going to hook us up with everything we need there. So make sure you're following along. For this stream, we're going to break it down into a couple of little sections. So first of all, I'm going to talk about our learning intention, and then we're going to look at what is rhetoric, what is it? And we're going to break it down into the rhetorical situation. And in my classroom, we definitely have the triangle, but we have that big picture as well. So we're going to look at that. And then we're going to look at some questions to consider. So when you are evaluating rhetoric, what do you look at? And then I've got a few little rhetorical risks because when you have to write your stuff, you have to think about the rhetorical situation of your writing as well. So are you super excited and with me? Thumbs up so far? Deal. Okay, so what in the world are we looking at? First of all, I wanted to start out just kind of letting you see where we're going. So we're looking at introducing rhetoric, which is using the available means. So the textbook that we're going to use, I'm going to show you in just a second. It's a very common textbook, so you're probably using it in your class, or if you're self-studying, it's a good idea to just kind of know where it comes from. And we're going to be able to explain effective rhetoric and evaluate how the writer's choices reflect the components of the rhetorical situation. So why does this matter? This matters because the big ideas and enduring understandings for the current AP Language and Composition class are rhetorical situation and style. These are the big ones for reading anyway. So if we look at it, we can see that individuals write within a particular situation and they make strategic writing choices based on that situation. And that the situation actually informs the stylistic choices that are made. Now, you actually do this all the time. I'm certain of it because there has been a time in your life when you wanted somebody to do something for you, whether it was getting a parent to let you go off somewhere when you knew you didn't deserve it for whatever reason, or a friend or a younger sibling or cousin that you manipulated into doing something. So not to say that all rhetoric is manipulation, but what you did is you thought about the rhetorical situation, whether you realized it or not. And as we go through tonight, you're going to be able to reflect on that. You'll see I'm right. And you're probably going to be a little bit sneaky about thinking of your rhetorical situation in the future. So are you guys super excited to look at this? How do you feel? Yes. All right. Okay. So with the big ideas and understandings, I think it's important that we look at the skill levels. So with the rhetorical situation, what we see is that we need to be able to identify and describe the components of the rhetorical situation. And that includes exigence, audience, writer, purpose, context, and message. We're going to look at those tonight, but I want to make sure and reiterate that this is so important because AP actually came out and said, dun, da, da, with the princess punctuation, you know exactly what they want you to know about rhetorical situation. So let's just know it. With the next one, we need to be able to explain how that argument demonstrates the understanding of the audience's belief, because we don't just come out and present information. We think, okay, based on who am I talking to, what do they know? What do I want them to know? How do I get them to that place? And then how do I make that desired audience movement happen? So rhetorical situation is a great way to bridge the gap. Now, you also have to be able to use these in writing because you've got those 3 questions. So you want to be able to write the introductions and the conclusions that are appropriate to your own rhetorical situation. And then, of course, you've got to demonstrate understanding of your audience as well. So it's kind of helpful to start with knowing exactly what they expect of you so that you can move on. So what are we using? We're looking at the language of composition information for today, just to kind of give you an idea of what it's from. Anybody using this in class? You might actually be using the 2nd edition of the book. The 3rd one is a little bit newer. Anybody thumbs up in the chat? This is the book I'm using? 2nd edition, yes. So I've used the 2nd edition for a long time. And so it's got a lot of the same stuff in there, but I think there are a few little pieces that are just a little bit more explained in this version. So that's kind of why we're looking at it tonight instead of the 2nd edition, but it's pretty much the same situation. So you should be familiar with some of this from your class. So who is this guy? Who knows? Anybody know who this guy is? Ooh, good guess. Good guesses. Okay, so this guy actually is Aristotle. And Aristotle defined rhetoric for us. And he said, in a really, really long document that you have to really kind of break down, he said, it is the faculty of observing, in any case, the available means of persuasion, which basically means you know what you want, you know who you're talking to, and you use those things to your advantage. So what does this mean? If we break it down, we really understand that understanding rhetoric, it means that you can use it to appeal to your audience. You recognize when it's being used on you. And so that makes you a more critical thinker in the real world. So what is the purpose of rhetoric? Initially, the purpose of rhetoric, and I think perhaps in the real world, the purpose of rhetoric is to resolve conflicts without confrontation. It's to persuade readers or listeners to support their position, or it's to move others to take action. So this is taken again from that very brief introduction that we have in the 3rd version, but I think it's valuable for us to understand it. So the rhetorical choices, when we talk about them, they're the strategic decisions that appeal to the audience of the text. Now, you might hear me or your teacher or even College Board call this a rhetorical choice or a rhetorical strategy or a rhetorical technique or a rhetorical faculty. We call these different things, but basically what we're getting at is, what does the author do in order to make stuff happen? Okay, that's kind of what we're looking at. So the goal of rhetoric is to apply, and our goal of learning it is to apply critical literary skills to help develop a position of informed citizenship and build effective arguments. Why do you think that's in quotes? That's because that's borrowed from our volume 3. So it's also helpful to look at the canons of rhetoric. So this will be mentioned in your textbook, especially those of you using volume 2, in a few different places. But if anyone follows regular blogs like Thought Co. or even The Art of Manliness, rhetoric is on those things. So it is based on Aristotle's principles, but then we have like Cicero, who kind of comes in and they say there are these 5 divisions of the rhetorical process. And so different people put them in different order, but we're looking first at style. What is done to convey the message? Invention. What is the context and how does that context inform that message? Arrangement. What is the structure of the argument? Memory. Now, originally that was like, because it was all spoken, but now it's like the prior knowledge that's related to the topic that you have. And then of course the delivery, it's the way that you present this out there. So if you think about the canons of rhetoric, they're actually going to help you build your rhetorical analysis. You can easily do a paragraph on how the style contributes to meaning, or you can do how invention contributes to the effectiveness. So I think it's important to just kind of have a heads up in your mind of these canons of rhetoric. So are you with me still? Like, can I have a thumbs up? Can I have a, like, how are you feeling right now about the rhetorical situation? Do you feel like a wee bit better than you did when you first got here? Yes, I love seeing that. It's like rhetoric is this huge, huge thing. And when we stop and we break it down in these pieces, it's attainable. We can definitely work it and make it happen and analyze it and use it on our own. So it's just great. All right, so I use this organizer in my class. Has anyone seen this in your class? Okay. Something similar. Well, I think the reason that it's similar is because we all look at that triangle, but there's so much more than just the triangle when we're looking at rhetoric. And so I start with this in Zelda games. That is hilarious. Okay, so when we look at the rhetorical situation, we have like this big circle. And this is the whole wide world, everything in the world that's going on at the time that this is happening. You have all of these little pieces. So if we kind of look at it step by step, I'm going to use this text today. And of course, you know this, right? Speech to the Virginia Convention, Patrick Henry. What is he known for saying? Can you tell me? Like, what does this guy say? He says, give me liberty or give me death. And there's some potent rhetoric in there. So since AP Lang is usually paired with US history, I wanted to use a text that I think would be relevant, but I also wanted to use something that maybe you are familiar with kind of as you go through. So when we look at this here in just a minute, we're going to use it to kind of practice what we're looking at. So if you kind of look at this very first part, the thing, I structured this to look like a College Board prompt. So you can see at the very top, you have the background. In the 1775, Patrick Henry introduced a resolution of the Virginia Convention to form the local militia to be prepared to fight the British. Read the text carefully in a written essay, analyze the rhetorical choices used to make the argument. So you kind of see what we're looking for, but valuable insight when we're looking at the rhetorical situation in that preview. Then we have the text. So as we go through, I'm going to focus on just what you can see here. But if you go through this text, you're going to find so many other examples. It's amazing. So not to bore you to death, let's get started. So according to our textbook, text is defined as any cultural product that's considered or investigated. It can literally be the newest Taylor Swift song or the newest Lizzo, like whatever it is that is being considered or evaluated can be called a text, even if it's not necessarily in written form, okay? So if I'm talking about context, that big circle, the context is historical, social, and cultural movements of the time. And this is tremendously important. I was kind of looking at how to come up with the example of context. Is anyone familiar with the song Zombie? If you could, down there in the little chat box, can you tell me who wrote the song Zombie? Like, do you know that song? Now, see, I have By the Cranberries, but that song actually has two versions. Like, there's the Bad Wolves version too. And so I want you guys, maybe not right now because we're chatting here, but I would like for you to go and look at, yes, that Cranberries version, and then go look at the Bad Wolves version. There are 3 words that are changed in these songs, but that's such a powerful way to look at context and really understand what it is, because the Cranberries are talking about a very different world from that of Bad Wolves. But the name is the same. And only 3 words have changed. So if you're looking to understand what context is, look into those 2 songs because I think it'll really help you. Next, we have occasion. Now, when we talked last, we were looking at the test overview and we referenced occasion and exigence. And these two are really big in terms of identifying why this text exists. But it's important because it helps drive you to the purpose. So Patrick Henry, like, we're going crazy. We're trying to be like, look, peace out, y'all. We don't like the way you're rolling things. You're on the other side of the pond. We're over here. We want to be our own. You can't control us anymore. Oh, wait a minute. Why do you already have tanks here? So if we're looking at Patrick Henry and we're trying to figure out what in the world is going on, we can see that it's the speech in the convention. We can think about what we know. 1775. Does anybody know what happened the next year? Like, I saw this on Jay Leno. People don't know nowadays. 1776, you know what this is, right? You're with me? Yes. Okay. So we've got some background context here. With that, what do you think it is that makes Patrick Henry be like, y'all, let's do this? In some texts, they tell us. And we see that in his too. But in some, they don't. This is important. If I go back to the example with zombies, you think about the occasion and the exigence. Look up the story behind the two, because one version of zombie is referenced more in American context, but the original one isn't at all. So look that up. It's a good way to help you see the difference between context and occasion and exigence. And remember, exigence, it's the what, why now? It's the why does this matter right this second? It's that thing that moves you to the action. And then, of course, purpose. We've talked about purpose before, the goal that the speaker wants to achieve. But here's the thing. If everything is an argument, that's great and all, but the purpose is probably not just to sell a book, or the purpose is probably not just to make money. So you want to think about that as you go along. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's think about this text in this realm of what we have here. We have the context, we have the occasion and the exigence, what you guys talked about. It is, of course, the American Revolution, and Patrick Henry saying, these tanks are here. What other enemies do we have? There are no other enemies. It must be meant for us. And so he sat through these speeches where they're kind of disagreeing on what to do, and he says, you know what? I'm going to stand up and I'm just going to tell you what I think, because that's what I need to do right here. The next piece, though, is kind of that outer edge of the rhetorical triangle. So we talk about the speaker and the audience and the subject. Anybody in here in like math, geometry? I promise I'm not going to go into math on you right here. But if you think of like the side angle side type thing, that's going to help you to remember this part of the rhetorical situation. So this is the actual rhetorical triangle. You've got to think about the speaker, the audience, and the subject. And these things work together so well that when we're looking at College Board's expectation, not only do we need to know this about the article that we're supposed to read, but we have to be able to think about this about the article that we have to build. So there are a lot of pieces that kind of connect in here. So when we reference the speaker is the person or the group who creates a text. So it may not only be one person. It could be a group of people, like the Declaration of Independence, for example. Or we have the idea of a persona. Now, persona is the mask that you show to your audience. And this is the difference between who the speaker is in real life and then the role that the speaker plays when delivering the message. So when I explain this to my students, I think of it like this. Who are you really? Versus who are you in front of your mother or your father or your grandmother? Or who are you around your friends in comparison to who you are around your girlfriend or your boyfriend's parents? That's a persona, okay? But sometimes we have to take on a different persona in order to create the desired effect. So the next piece is the audience. Now it could be the listener, the viewer, the reader, okay? It has to be presented in a way that they understand it. The diction, the syntax, all of that. It has to be at the level the audience can get. But there's also another piece to think about with the audience. Like Patrick Henry, his audience is not Stephanie Kirk and the Fiveable crew on today's date in 2019. Patrick Henry was talking to the people in the convention. So what we see is that there is a primary audience, But sometimes there's a secondary or there's an unintended audience that is created if the text ends up somewhere else. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's some other place, but we start to see these little pieces like that. Next, we have the subject, the topic that's being addressed. When we're looking at what that is, you kind of want to think, what's this thing mostly about? How do I figure out what this big thing is, and how do I move forward from it? So from there, we are going to come back to this text. So if I'm looking at what all of these elements are and how they all kind of come together, I want to think about them in terms of the rhetorical situation and then that rhetorical triangle. So we talked about that context, historical, social, cultural. We're kind of going through the American Revolution, like it's a big deal. There are tanks already here, so we kind of have to work on that. And we're trying to figure out what in the world should we do in order to help us get through this. So that next piece that we look at is the purpose. What does Patrick Henry want us to do? Well, he's pretty blatant. He tells us, give me liberty or give me death. He says, let's go fight, y'all. War's here. Let's just get going on. So then we look at the speaker and the audience and the subject. So some of these pieces overlap, just like we referenced a moment ago. So what we see is obviously our speaker's Patrick Henry. But let's look at kind of how he presents himself. He says, no man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism as well as the abilities of the very worthy gentlemen who have just addressed the House. But different men often see the same subject in different lights, and therefore I hope it will not be thought disrespectful to those gentlemen if, entertaining as I do, opinions of a character very opposite to theirs, I shall speak forth my sentiments freely and without reserve. So you can kind of see how he's presenting himself and where he's going with this idea as he moves forward. So the question becomes, what do we know about the audience and what do we know about the subject? Well, we know it's the people who are in the Virginia Convention. We know that they have agreed that even if they don't agree, they're going to walk out and they're going to agree. We know that we're looking at the American Revolution and we're looking at the way that things are going to kind of break apart, the way that things are going to go for our country in the next few days. And then we know that everyone who's in there is going to have some idea of what's been going on. But we also see a connection to the audience. If we look kind of down on that first, on the left-hand side, for my own part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery. Why do you think he uses the phrase freedom or slavery? He knows his audience knows what freedom is and what slavery is. And he knows that his audience doesn't want to be a bunch of slaves. So he uses that intentionally. So when we read, we can start to see what he thinks about his audience, but we can see that connection between the two. Okay, so are you with me here on this first level? Can you give me something in the chat to say, hey, I'm cool, I got you? All right. Woo. Okay. So breaking it down just a little bit more, we have another layer. Okay. And this one's at the middle because this is like the heart of everything, and not just like the heart because the heart feels, but because these are the appeals that we use. Okay. So rhetorical situation, big deal, rhetorical triangle. And then you got the heart of the issue. So it's kind of like the little heart from the Grinch. It's 3 sides. It's too small. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So ethos, logos, pathos. What do you know? Can you tell me something in the chat? It's not like I call it ELP. It's not Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, but if that's how you remember it, let it stick there. Okay, ethos, ethics. Okay, I'm with you. Pathos, emotions. And logos, logic. Okay, I agree. We're going to talk about ethos a little bit differently because it's not just ethics. It's also like credibility and reliability and trustworthiness. So we want to add those in as we're looking for it. But great that you guys are with me so far. Okay, so rhetorical triangle is like the first part of ethos is probably the most important because if you can't trust your speaker, then what's the point? Like it doesn't even matter at this point. So ethos, it's the expertise, the experience, the sincerity. It's the combination of these things that gives the audience the reason for listening to this speaker. Okay, so sometimes you have automatic ethos. For example, you trust me because I'm an AP language and composition teacher. You trust me because Fiveable says, expert teacher Stephanie Kirk. That's why you trust me. But why do you trust Patrick Henry? Why do you trust that other speaker? So the next piece I want you to think about is when you have to build your ethos. You're establishing trust or credibility, but you don't necessarily know where it's at. How do you do that? Well, you do that through sound reasoning, through acknowledging other opinions, or even just being thoughtful and well-informed, like having an idea of that concept as you move forward. Okay. Are you with me still? With the ethos? Okay. So in this speech, ethos is, again, credibility, trustworthiness. How do we know that this person is really legit? And in this example, what we see, no man thinks more highly than I do of the patriotism. He's almost like saying, listen, everyone who's come up here, they're great people and they have great ideas, but everybody sees things differently. And I hope it's not disrespectful, but I kind of have a different opinion. So maybe we can talk about that. When we see this, he is building that. He's saying, you know what? I do have a different idea, but it's coming from a place of respect. So it's coming from a place of obligation. You should trust me because this is what our goal is. Our goal is to come together and figure out what we're looking at and figure out if we're doing the right thing. Okay, tons of other examples here, but it's important structure that he starts out this way. So when you're looking at that rhetorical triangle, whether it's that big circle, the basics, or the heart of the issue, you want to look at how it's structured as well. Okay, so logos. Logos is that thought process that occurs. It's appealing to reason by giving a clear main idea, evidence that supports it, and that structure that helps to progress the ideas, okay? Generally, you see this through like a counter argument. You're anticipating objections or opposing views. You're looking at concession. You're agreeing, you know what, this part might work, but that part's not. So you're kind of letting them win on points. And then, of course, refutation. You're just going against it, like denying the validity of all of it, okay? So when we think about logos, we think about not only that channeling of ideas, but like statistics, those sorts of things that bring it together and let you see how it works from one point to the next, okay? So once again, in our example with Patrick Henry, if we're looking for that logical appeal here, what we can see is, and judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been in the conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify these hopes with which gentlemen have been pleased to solace themselves in the house. Because he says, you guys keep hoping it gets better, but think back on your experiences. Think back in the last 10 years. Why do you have hope? Where are you balancing that from? So you can kind of see that there is a logical appeal. He says, logically, look at the past. Look at what's happened. Okay, now look at where we are now. Do you see this connection? Notice the way that it kind of controls the audience. The audience is going to be like, well, yeah, you're kind of right. Another example down there at the bottom, this warlike preparations, which cover our waters and darken our lands. Are these fleets and armies necessary for a work of love? So he's like, hey, they're not even showing us love. Why would you bring a tank to the house? Because you're going to blow us up. Okay, so you start to see those pieces. Are you with me on logic? Okay, so we're going to kind of jump over into that next realm, the rhetorical triangle in terms of pathos. I think of pathos, I want you to think of sympathy and empathy, okay? Because it's not just, oh, I feel sorry for him. It's like, I can imagine how that feels. So pathos is, of course, the appeals to the emotions. It's the values, the desires, the hopes, the fears, the where's your child at 10 p.m., all of those things. And pathos really works because of this idea of connotation and the idea of denotation. So connotation is the emotional words, or it's the connections we have with something, whereas denotation is the literal dictionary definition. And this is something as simple as that. Well, we'll look at an example, but this is something as simple as saying freedom or slavery. Slavery is a heated word. It's like saying racism today, okay? So we see the emotion immediately comes in there. So when we're looking at evaluating pathos and evaluating what those appeals are, we see that example, okay? Now, when you look at it, there are other examples in here as well. For example, on the opposite side, he says, insidious smile. And then he says, it's a snare to your feet. Suffer yourselves to not be betrayed with a kiss. We're throwing in other devices there as well, but you can see that there's an emotional connection that's being brought in there. Are you with me here on this one? Okay. So here is the one thing that I do want to point out to you, okay? Everything everything is intentional, okay? We sometimes can't control our context, right? I can't control historically what's going on in that background around me. So I know that if I'm looking at that and I'm looking at the occasion, I'm looking at the exigence. The exigence is the thing that pushes that speaker to come out and to say, hey, here is my opinion. Here's what we need to do. And then, of course, purpose is what is that desired audience movement? What's the thing that you want to have happening in the end? So if we're looking at the idea of audience, speaker, and subject, or speaker, audience, subject, however you choose to remember that, the connection inside with the little heart of it with ethos, logos, and pathos is that you want to see that logical connection between the speaker knows the subject, right? But you want to see some emotional connection between the audience and the subject. So that's why we kind of put pathos there. And then on the opposite side, the audience needs to be able to trust the speaker. And so that's why ethos goes over there, right? So by thinking about the graphic organizer, you're able to put these pieces together when you're evaluating it. Now, I just spent all of this time talking to you about the rhetorical triangle. This is like the holy trinity of what you're doing in AP language and composition, but please listen to me carefully. Do not write your rhetorical analysis essay and say the author uses ethos, or the author uses logos, or the author builds pathos. Those three words are identified by AP readers as words that appear in the lowest scoring essays. Are you with me? Can you give me a sign in the chat? Because this is so important. Like, it's so important. I contacted you. Don't use that, okay? You also, what you do not want to do is you do not want to build your whole essay and then be like, introduction, Patrick Henry uses ethos, logos, and pathos in order to persuade the people to vote to fight for freedom. And then write paragraph 1 about his ethos, and paragraph 2 about logos, and paragraph 3 about pathos. Because that's not a great thing. We are thrilled that you know that. But instead of looking at just what this rhetorical triangle is, look at what it does. Why does Patrick Henry say this? Why does he say, hey, listen, nobody thinks more highly of you guys and your patriotism than me, but you have to listen to me. So it's not just about the fact that there's ethos present, okay? What is done to look at ethos? So have I completely confused you and terrified you? I hope not. This is where we start because it's easy for us in our brains to question these things, okay? It's easy for us to say, why can't I trust you? It's easy for us to look at it and see emotion in it. And it's easy for us to kind of see logic. Now, here's what I will say. If it's something we agree with, we often follow the logic easily. If it's something with which we disagree, it's much easier for us to find the fallacy. So when we're evaluating the rhetorical situation, you have to think about that from the big picture, okay? All right, so where are you guys with me? You feeling good on this whole idea? Because I see a frowny face, but I don't see any questions. Slightly intimidating. You know what? I can understand that. I do hear you. But I have complete faith in you. And the fact that you're like here on, I'm not sure what time zone you're in, but it's like 6:33 here, my time. That tells me you're going to be okay. It is intimidating. But what we want you to do is to realize that you can do this, that you can break it down, look at the context. Now, it could be challenging if you don't know history very well, okay? But did you notice the way that in that Patrick Henry text, like if I go back to it, look at the introduction. In the world of AP, they're going to give you everything they can, and they're going to do everything to try and help you out, okay? So even if I don't know a lot about who Patrick Henry is or why we have this speech in the convention, I can see at the top, he introduced a resolution to be prepared to fight the British. So that gave me enough context that I can be like, oh, 1775, fight the British. I got you. We're about to peace out, okay? Then as we read, and I'm actually going to be looking at how to annotate effectively. If we think about ethos, logos, and pathos in terms of annotation, label that beside what you see, because that can be a good place to start when you're looking at breaking down the rhetorical triangle and you're looking at breaking down the appeals. because it's not just about the appeals. It's these other pieces as well. Okay, feel a little bit better about that? Okay, so if we go back and we kind of look at where we are, everything is intentional. There are rhetorical choices being made very specifically for the purposes of that audience movement. What are we looking for and how are we going to get there? So what we've done is we've gone through and we've looked at the speech to the Virginia Convention, and then we talked about that concept of the song Zombies, the Cranberries version and the Bad Wolves version, okay? I'll let you guys debate which one is better. That's more for Q3 than what we're looking at with analysis. So from here, our next step, since we all look like we understand ethos, logos, and pathos, are some questions that you want to consider. So what makes up the rhetorical situation? Do you remember? Can anyone tell me in the chat? If I just say, okay, let's evaluate the rhetorical situation, what is your brain going to go to? Yes, speaker, audience, subject. That's your outside. What's that circle? Do you remember the circle? I'm very animated. Okay, so you've got your big triangle is your speaker, your audience, and your subject. You're inside of that, the heart, and I do it this way because it kind of makes it look like a little weird heart. That's your ethos, logos, and pathos. But remember the circle. When we're evaluating the rhetorical situation, that circle is your context, your occasion or your exigence, and the purpose, okay? So think about that. You've got that big circle, that context. It really matters. It's really going to kind of make or break the situation, okay? All right, rhetorical appeals, you've already answered that. Ethos, logos, and pathos. Okay, so what is the difference between automatic ethos and building ethos? What's that difference? Do you remember? Okay, reputation is automatic. Absolutely, 100%. When you are looking at building ethos, why would you want to do it? What's the point of communicating that? If I have automatic ethos because I'm an AP language and composition teacher, why would I still make an effort to tell you who I am or what I am? Okay, I definitely would want to build the credibility and the trustworthiness of what's going on in the thing that I'm presenting. In this case, it's the lesson to you guys. So if we're looking at it, you want to evaluate, is it automatic or is it built? And sometimes you have automatic ethos that you don't necessarily deserve. But sometimes you can build ethos that helps to communicate the message you're trying to get across and helps you to meet the purpose that you're trying to build. Okay, so how might you use images and humor to achieve the purpose? Where does that fall? Which is that? Ethos, logos, or pathos? What do you think? Okay, that's a trick question, I think. That can definitely be all of them, but pathos is kind of where I was going with that immediately, because the images being visual, that is oftentimes what helps us to have an emotional connection to things. And the thing about images that are so fun, or well, humor is kind of more challenging, but the thing about images that's so fun when you're looking at analyzing rhetoric is the words can create the image in your brain. And when you have the words creating the image in your brain, you don't have to have a picture. So your speaker or your persona has built the picture using the words, which allows your audience to connect on a whole new level. So I think that's a pretty important thing to think about. When you're looking at humor, I said that one was a little bit tricky. Why did I say that one's tricky? What is it about recognizing humor? I'm going to give Cindy like player of the day. You're like the rock star over here. Okay, so when we're looking at the idea of humor, it can be challenging because if it's an older text, which it very well could be, it's harder to figure out what's going on because you don't necessarily know the person or the context, that sort of thing. And I'm sure that you've gotten a text message before and you're like, are you throwing shade? Like, are you salty? I don't know. Or maybe you've heard the argument in the hallway where someone's like, girl, you better check your tone. So those pieces are kind of helpful to us. Okay, so how does an author effectively combine ethos, logos, and pathos to create an argument? What would be the benefit of that? Thoughts? I know that one's kind of a brain wrap. But if we're going to combine all three, we're going to maximize the audience that we hit, right? So it's kind of like, first of all, if I can build my ethos and you don't know me and I don't have automatic ethos, then I'm going to get more people to follow me. I'm going to get more people to believe what I have to say, or at least to respect it or consider it. If I'm using some emotion and I can build emotional contact, like that's going to be a huge strength. One joke that we have in my class is that pathos is grounded in like puppies and old people and babies, because nobody wants to hurt puppies or old people or babies, but like middle-aged, like it's a free-for-all, right? So we see that in our writing where we can create that emotional connection. And then of course that last piece is logos, because if there is too much pathos in a text, you're like, this is clearly scare tactic, or that's a worst case scenario. That's not going to happen to me, or not in my backyard. So when we build those three together, we create a more effective argument by layering the impact, reaching multiple appeals, and broadening the audience that we can bring in. Okay. So I think that's a big thing to point out. Okay. So the last one is really a challenging question, I think. What makes rhetoric effective or ineffective? How do you know? Is it just whether you agree with it? Is it whether it changes your mind? Where and when and how it's used? I think that's a perfect answer, because it's got to be the right time in the right place. And there are so many fallacies that kind of come out in the world. My favorite example when I think of rhetoric, I think of Homer Simpson, because in the episode, like he says he doesn't need English. He's never going to England. So that's kind of just a very starting point of what we were looking at with effectiveness. And why it's used is a true thing, because when you're evaluating it, it's not just about what are they doing, it's about why are they doing it. So what is Patrick Henry doing to create credibility and reliability and trustworthiness? And why is he doing that? But also, how does it impact the audience? So you want to look at all three of those things, okay? It's the same situation when you're looking at logos or pathos. What is being done to build this emotional connection? Why is he using the phrase freedom or slavery for that connection? Why are those words the ones that are going to work? Well, it's going to work because his audience is going to recognize the concept of slavery. So how does it impact them? Well, because in their brains, they're like, whoa, you're right. I don't want to be a slave. That sucks. So we're kind of able to see that transition. And then when we're looking at the same thing with logos, what is he doing when he says, hey, the tanks are here? Do they have any other enemy like over here? Well, if there's no other enemy, then who are they here for? It's obviously not love. It's clearly an act of war. Okay, so if that's what he does, why does he do that? Well, he's drawing attention to the fact that the tanks are here. He's making us focus on the fact that these are warlike preparations. So how does it impact the audience? The audience is going to start to be like, oh, you're right. Why are they here? Took a lot of effort to get them here. So you can see all of these pieces coming together. So it's not just the where and the when and the how, but we want to think of it in terms of what is being done to reach this appeal. And you're never going to write the author builds ethos. You're going to say the author proves credibility when whatever. Okay. So you can do that, but don't use the little words. Okay. So what is done? Why does the author do it? And how does it work on the audience? How is it effective? Okay. So you got your what, you got your why, you got your how, and that's going to be what you're looking for. Okay. Are there any questions about the things I wanted you to think about right here? Okay, so we've got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to make sure that I look at some rhetorical risks that you take when you are writing, because as I showed you, our standards are not just looking at, it's not just looking at the concept of reading it. You've got to be able to write it as well. So speakers make these rhetorical choices or rhetorical faculty, rhetorical technique, rhetorical strategies, whatever it is, for a specific purpose. And so just like you said a minute ago, it's not just what it's used, always link to why it is used and how it creates audience movement. Okay. So in my last session, I talked about the letter to Santa, right? When you wrote your letter to Santa, what were the strategies you used? Well, you probably said, hey, Santa, I've been a really good girl this year. I've been a really good boy this year. I've really done all my chores. I've kept my grades up. Please buy me a Baby Alive or whatever it was, a Switch. And so it's what is being used, why is it being used, and then how is it being used? Well, with the letter to Santa, clearly you're trying to get Santa to get you these gifts. So what are you doing? Well, you start out by saying, I've been a really good kid this year. This is what I deserve. And then you probably presented some sort of logical thing, okay? And then in some cases, I don't know, maybe your Santa letter says, I know this is something that my family wouldn't get for me, so you're the only hope I have, or whatever it is. But we see the what is used, the why it's used, and the how it's used, and we think about it in terms of audience movement, okay? All right. The course is primarily based on models of effective rhetoric. You should pretty much assume that if you've been given something that's got the little College Board thing on it, it's deemed effective. But you should definitely look for ineffective examples all around you. Like, there's no shortage of examples of really bad rhetoric, in fact. So as you kind of think through what makes this effective, in the real world, we want to think about what makes this ineffective. Not that it's not all ineffective, because clearly rhetoric is still happening. You've clearly seen people follow these things, whether it was meant with negative intent or not with negative intent. You've seen rhetoric work. So humor and satire. I think that this is valuable to look at in the AP Lang and Comp situation. There have been a few prompts that, like, for example, the flamingo prompt, or like Jonathan Swift, eating the babies. Those things can work. They can work with you with pathos, but the problem is you're taking a rhetorical risk that your audience knows what you're talking about. But what if your audience doesn't know what you're talking about? What if they don't get the message? What if they think that the speaker is being disrespectful? What if they think they're trivializing something that matters to them? Well, then you've just isolated your audience. You've just pushed them away even further. You're not going to get your point across. So you want to be careful and cautious when you're using these, but you can also find them in other texts and evaluate their effectiveness as well. Okay, so the last thing is offending or pushing away the people that you want to bring to your way of thinking. That can be a risk that you take if you are stacking your cards in one place. If you are only addressing an emotional appeal, then you are probably not connecting all of these things. And you're probably going to push away the people who recognize all you're doing is emotional appeal. Okay? If you're only focusing on me and I and why I should be trusted, then you got eye trouble. It's not about you. It's about the whole world. So you've got to break it down in that manner as well. Okay, so that kind of brings us around to everything that we want to look at with the rhetorical triangle. We've got a couple of examples. We brought back our Santa example. We looked at that concept of Patrick Henry's speech, and then we moved into the realm of, we talked about the zombie song. Another one would be looking at the Black Eyed Peas song, Where's the Love? Ooh, compare that one. Man, if we had all the time in the world, we could just watch these music videos and talk about them and compare them back and forth. But I think you can do that. And then if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to me. Stephanie Kirk. I am an AP Language and Composition teacher, and I'm available on Twitter at Kirk's Corner. So you can follow me. You can send me a direct message. If you have any questions, I'll stick around for a little minute for you. But I think right now you've got a pretty good understanding of the rhetorical triangle. Do you think you feel better about it as well? Yes. Okay. Perfect. I love that. Do you have any questions for me? Anything about the rhetorical triangle? Are you totally prepared to go in and wow your teacher tomorrow with everything that you've learned? That is fantastic. Okay, well, there are no questions. We've gone through. I want to kind of challenge you to go back and think about kind of what we've done. Watch the review. If you have any questions, go along. Remember what our goal was here. What we really wanted to do, what I wanted you to be able to do, is when you walk away from this and you take ownership of your learning, first of all, I want you to know that you can do this. I believe in you, and you've got so many examples and so many resources. We're going to be here to help you the whole way through. So we want you to be able to explain the effective rhetoric that's being used and to evaluate what makes it effective. So we're looking at what, we're looking at why, and we're looking at how. And when we do that, we have to think about the rhetorical situation, the whole thing, the big shebang, okay? So you've got that circle. Can you remember what the circle is? Can you show me the circle in the little chat? When we're looking at the circle, we're looking at historical, social, and cultural context. Okay, so what's going on in the world? We're looking at the purpose. What is the goal this person wants to achieve? And then we're looking at the occasion or the exigence. Why does this matter now? Like, why now? And then inside of that circle, you got your big triangle. Okay, so I want you to think of your big triangle inside of your big circle. And your big triangle is what? Do you remember? What's your big triangle? Close. Speaker, yeah. Audience and subject. Hooray! It's like geometry. Side, angle, side, right? Except not side, angle, side. It's like the one that's more fun. It's the speaker, audience, and the subject. And inside of this big one, so you got your circle, you got your big triangle, and then you got the other triangle, the smaller triangle that's upside down. You're right. Ethos, logos, pathos. Those are the appeals. Fantastic. Hey, you guys are going to rock this test. Do you remember your test day off the top of your head? Do you remember it? Anybody? The second week of AP exams. That's true. Almost always on a Wednesday. Morning test, 8 a.m. I know. It is 8 a.m. It is in May. May the what? May the what? It's super early. I know. It is May 13th, right? May the 13th. Hey, you guys have fun. Check back in. Don't forget to follow Think Fiveable online on all of our different platforms. You can follow me as well. Send us a message. Let us know if you have any questions. And other than that, I'm going to see you guys next time. Have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Bye.